I've got 20 minutes to fill in the panel session from earlier and tell you the two tuppence worth according to Mike Ritchie. What's the theme? The Federation is failing. We've got a plethora of different policies and arrangements across the country. I'm just going to point to a few of them with a view to saying, for the first time in a long time, the Federal Minister actually, the words waste and recycling came out of their mouth. That's a big step forward. The second one was that we're going to dust off the National Waste Policy, which was introduced in 2009 by Peter Garrett and has basically been gathering dust for 9 years, with every 3-year review by a couple of officers in the department and absolutely no leadership or implementation coordination across the states. That's not to say states haven't done things and great things over the last 9 years, and also the feds have tended to play in their space, their statutory space, but there's been no coordination at a strategic level in spite of officers wanting it to happen. So here's a little quick summary of the state of play in the Federation, if you like. The first one, I'm just going to name a couple of the highlight points around the kind of strategic issues that I think need to be consolidated. So the first is harmonisation, use that word conservatively, of waste targets. And you can see there's states and territories with targets or no targets, and targets, a lot of them now are in that 60 to 80% group. And wouldn't it be good if we could just land on some numbers, and some states could be above those targets for now, and some states below them, and we all work to specific targets. But look, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia tend to be in a band, laggard being Queensland, Northern Territory, Tasmania. And when you break into those targets, there's any number of different permutations, combinations, caveats on each one. And I don't propose to read through them all other than to say that there is no consistency even in the terminology used. I'll come to the reporting in a moment. But you can see the kinds of numbers, but there is this band of 65 to 80% of some consistency, and at the federal level it would be great if we could get that to be locked down. And we continue. Now, if you're an international, there's a couple of clients in the room who are international investors who want to come to Australia and do big technology and big innovation, and they see this and they go, you are kidding, aren't you? With that variability in targets, that variability in reporting, that variability in definitions, and they just go, the country just needs to get its act together. And we do. Waste data, particular bugbear of mine. This is from the actual National Waste Report of 2 years ago. The methods used by the Australian government for categorising and analysing data are not always the same as those used by the states and territories. Figures presented here may differ from corresponding figures presented in states and territories. All they've got to do is add 8 states together to get a national total, but we can't even do that in Australia. And I'll tell you why. Because Victoria, interestingly, and the Commonwealth now deduct the landfill gas that they capture at the landfills, thanks for the earlier talk, from the tonnes into the landfill. So they say, okay, if you landfilled 100,000 tonnes and you captured 15,000 tonnes of gas, you actually only landfilled 85,000 tonnes of waste. Hold on, run that by me again. And that's now embedded in the Victorian and in the national accounts. We can't even get a definition on what is waste. Who can tell me how much Australia generates in waste per year? Well, you'll hear the figures 50, 53 and 60. Why? Because we sometimes include fly ash, we sometimes include hazardous waste, and the National Waste Report now embeds that. It now actually gives you 3 figures for waste generation. Now, how would any investor, Macquarie Bank, anyone who wants to come and invest in this sector, deal with this kind of level of basic uncertainty about what it is, what business we're actually in? Now, we're not in the fly ash business. Does anyone here deal with coal wash or coal rejects or fly ash? No. And most of that fly ash that's mentioned up there is from coal power stations. It's not fly ash from mass burn incinerators. If it was, well, you'd have an argument that it should be included. But it's not. It should just be excluded. Hazardous waste? Well, maybe it should be included or maybe not. Let's have a discussion and then land on a nomenclature and stick to it so that we all know how much waste is landfilled in Australia. Now, there's 3 different numbers for, in this case, landfilling. Waste generation. 2 different definitions of waste generation in Australia. One from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, one from the federal government based on voluntary reporting by the states to Blue Environment, who then pulled together the national report. 2 different trends. Again, if I'm an investor looking to invest in this sector, what's the growth rate of waste? At a national level, we don't even have an answer, never mind at the state by waste stream, by location. The reporting systems are different, there's little standardisation, the data's different and it's incompatible so that you can't sum it across. Now, it's not beyond the realms of smart people to develop an Excel spreadsheet that is vaguely smart that says, all right, for the purpose of this report we're going to drop out fly ash, or for the purpose of another report we're going to drop out something else, so that we can land on an agreed nomenclature and an agreed set of numbers. And here's my problem. This is the comment about the Victorian and the national scheme. So anything that's captured as gas now in Victoria or federally gets deducted in mass balance terms from the tonnes in across the weighbridge. Now, if I'm a Mandalay or a weighbridge technology company and I have to report according to this, I'm going to have a different set of reporting standards in Victoria or nationally than I do in New South Wales and Queensland. It completely buggers up waste reporting. For example, this one initiative instantly removes 2.3 million tonnes from Australia's waste to landfill, because it says we captured the gas equivalent, therefore the waste didn't come over the weighbridge, therefore it didn't happen, therefore we never landfilled it. And the argument is, well, that's what you do for anaerobic digestion or other technologies. Well, actually, no, it's not. If I put 100,000 tonnes into an anaerobic digester and collect the gas, let's say we collected 100,000 tonnes of anaerobic digestion using the Victorian and the federal models, I put 0 tonnes into that anaerobic digester, 100,000 minus 100,000. I'm now reporting 0 tonnes in. It's just a complete nonsense. And yet it is in our nomenclature right now, and probably known by 3 people in the country, spotted by one of the MRA staff who started burying, and I was shocked, probably as much as people in the room are, that this method is somehow appearing in our system. But it gets worse, because then you say, well, those tonnes never went to landfill, therefore our recycling rate, or our landfill rate, has actually fallen by 12% in the last 3 years because of this effect. 12% less waste to landfill, just on reporting data. And our waste to recycling, waste to energy has increased by, let me quote the number, 1,916% over what it should be, because of the way this maths is being done. So those of you who are regulators, and I mentioned this in the panel session this morning, can they please deal with this and get it changed? Let's turn to mechanisms. This is a report done in the 2009 National Waste Strategy of who's got what mechanisms in play. Now, you'd think in a federation we could get this basic delivery of services right. So waste strategies, who has them? Waste and recycling targets, who has them? Household hazardous waste collection, product stewardship scheme, landfill levy and landfill bans. Right, it's pretty simple. Someone smart went through and went, yep, you've got it, you don't have it, da-da-da-da. We just did another version of that for the purposes of this presentation. Now, you can obviously argue a little bit at the margins about how you define certain things, but one improvement, we now have national strategies pretty much everywhere, even the federal government, albeit 9 years old. Targets, mishmash. Levies, still a bit of a mishmash, though there is movement. Landfill bans, not very prevalent. Hazardous waste tracking, no, real mixed bag. Container deposits, we'd say, yeah, there's a bit of movement there, although a couple of significant holdouts in Victoria and Tassie. Stockpile limits, no, a couple of governments have done it, but the most haven't. Minimum standards for construction demolition, only one. Energy from waste policy, a little bit of movement there. Landfill list, Victoria, if you want to build a landfill, you've got to be on a pre-arranged list and you've got to go through a process. No other states have those. Infrastructure grants, not much. Now, all I would say is the federal government should be leading that table. That's the role of the federal government, is to take the states through that table and say, what is your process for putting a tick in this, or at least get it off? Let's make a decision. We're not doing that. It's contrary to Commonwealth, state arrangement. That column is not being done. Not hard, not rocket science. The effect of all of that is this. This is the landfill pricing in metro capital cities across Australia. Now, it's not a wonder that 1 million tonnes drives from Sydney to Brisbane every day on the Pacific Highway when you can landfill for $30 in Brisbane and $220 for the same waste in Sydney. Now, some people are speculating that that's now grown to 1.5 million tonnes per year. That's 30,000 truck movements on the Pacific Highway in each direction every year. That's in the order of I did the calc once, 500 movements a week of trucks, B-doubles running up and down the highway for nothing. Now, admittedly, Queensland in the last 2 months have announced they might introduce a levy. The latest speculation at around $50 to $70. The latest speculation is that might wait until early next year. Now, that means we're going to move another 1 million tonnes, basically, over this period. And those of you who are coastal councils up the coast, like Coffs, that's why there's all these B-doubles rolling and trucks rolling through town. There is movement on some policy settings, the levies. South Australia have now announced that they're increasing their levy to $103. New South Wales is $138. If Queensland moves to 70, they'd be in the middle of that Victorian West Australia pack. But you've still got 0 in Tasmania, 0 in Northern Territory, and hopefully Queensland moves. And that little spike back there is Queensland in 2010-11. And their recycling industry crashed 17% the year after they took the levy away. To talk briefly about levy harmonisation, what does that mean? The Waste Management Association said we need harmonisation of the levy. And I'd hate people to think that means the levy's got to be the same level. Because if it's hard to get some of those other actions up there, it's impossible to get the levies to be all set at the same quantum. What harmonisation means to me is that the trajectory of the levy is known for each state. That, okay, like South Australia said, for the next 4 years we're going to increase the levy by $10, blah. Or in New South Wales, we're going to increase the levy for the next 8 years by $10 plus CPI. That way companies that want to invest in the state can do their calcs and their business cases based on known trajectories of the levy and what that means for pricing. So it doesn't matter that they're all at different levels, but at the very least, the trajectory of the levy needs to be known. The second is that the magnitude of the levy doesn't cause unintended consequences, like the movement of 1 to 1.5 million tonnes to Queensland. The levy influences long-term behaviour. The purpose of the levies have two effects. One is to change behaviour, and the other one is to give a pool of money to use for good things. Plenty of people miss the first one. They say, well, there's this pool of money, it's $700 million in New South Wales, why aren't you spending it in waste? I'd make a couple of points. The first and most important effect of the levy is it changes landfill gate fees relative to recycling gate fees. That is by far its most important influence. That when you're a waste generator, you've got a binary decision, do I landfill it or do I recycle it? If recycling is $1 cheaper than landfilling, you'll recycle it. If it's $1 more or $50 more or $100 more to recycle, as it is in Queensland at the moment, then you just won't recycle. It's a binary decision. That's the primary role of the levy. The secondary role is Okay. And for that reason, these can be different in different states because the landfill price is different in different states. The magnitude of the levy is set by the opportunity cost of recycling and the opportunity cost of landfill. They don't have to be the same in all states. Now, one might say that, hold on, the cost of recycling a tonne of paper in Sydney shouldn't be that different to a tonne of paper in Victoria, and that's probably true. So there probably does need to be some recalibration of levies, but they don't have to be identical. The point is that it sends the right binary price signal to a generator. It has to be then used to engage in purchasing infrastructure and supply of materials. It has to fund resource recovery, and it should apply consistently across the different streams. And Queensland is having an active debate at the moment about whether it applies to municipal solid waste. It should, because when Jim's Mowing turns up, what's Jim's Mowing going to say? I'm domestic, and therefore I'm exempt from the levy. And interestingly, Victoria has a built-in subsidy to transport waste long distances. If you generate a tonne of waste in Melbourne and you landfill it in Melbourne, you pay $64. If you drive that waste 50 kilometres, you pay $32 at the levy. So all they've done is invest a $32 subsidy in transporting the stuff out of Melbourne. Whereas in Sydney, if you generate a levy, the levy travels with if you generate a tonne of waste, the levy travels with the waste, and that's how it should be. People often say to me, does the levy drive recycling? Well, you can cast your eyes down those two columns and say, yep, on balance, you know, the higher the levy, the more recycling you get. It's not rocket science. Queensland LV, I've already talked about it. The Queensland levy is finally coming, hopefully, and there's been a major shift in policy settings by the Queensland government. I won't dwell on it. Interestingly, the Local Government Association has finally come on board with levies, and they are always the biggest opponents of levies. They say the levy is a tax on households. Well, yes, it is. It's also a tax on business, and they pay the same amount as they should. And it sends the same price signal to councils to do the right thing to recycle as it does to businesses. However, local government is a far bigger beneficiary of the rebates coming from the levy than the private sector is. So if anyone has grounds for a whinge, it's actually the private sector, not local government. Having said that, local government put in 1/3 of the levy, private sector puts in 2/3, you get a bigger pot out. If you're local government, you can hypothecate more than 50% of the levy, then it's a guaranteed investment fund. You put in $1, you get $2 back. That's not a bad investment, and that's why local government are strongly advocating for higher hypothecation rates, and I don't think there'd be many people in the room that would disagree with that. Regulatory instruments, again, no consistency across the country. Response to China, no consistency. I'm not going to dwell on it, but other than 2 states have moved and plenty haven't. Energy from waste policies, you can see there's just some policies, not others. Again, if I'm an investor, you know, it's fantastic for consultants, but it's an absolute nightmare if you want to actually do anything. Planning, no consistency. I can build a 200,000 tonne C&D processing yard in Melbourne without an environment licence. Do that in Sydney? Man, there are regulators all over you. Ask Mark just there, you know. A completely different regulatory framework. Same environmental impact, but different rules. The way forward, this is my last slide, Amanda. Harmonise the targets, harmonise reporting, harmonise the data, focus on infrastructure because that's where the big gains are in terms of tonnes to landfill and getting the levy and economic signals right. Harmonise at a level that drives recycling rates, attach the levy liability to the waste, and the federal government doesn't actually have to invest in this stuff, it just has to coordinate through a consultative process with the states. And it's that next little step I'm encouraging the federal government to do, that we're not asking them to suddenly invest in a 200-person bureaucracy. It's just get a couple of people who can bring the states to the table and fill in those tables and actually drive the activity at the state level. If the Commonwealth could do that, that would be a major step forward which has been missing for a decade. Thanks very much.